She was thrown out by her husband for birthing twin daughters. Then a vampire king emerged from the storm and said, "Come with me." The winter wind in Thorn's car cut through flesh like a dull blade, slow and merciless. Snow fell in thick curtains, burying the cobblestone streets beneath layers of white silence. Street lamps flickered with ghostly blue light, casting long shadows that stretched and twisted across frozen ground. On a weathered bench at an abandoned carriage stop, a young woman sat collapsed against the iron armrest, her body curled protectively around two small bundles pressed against her chest. Her dress, thin, blood-stained, meant for the warmth of a manor house, clung to her like a shroud. A tattered red bag lay half-buried in snow beside her feet. Her breath came in shallow clouds. Her fingers, blue-tinged and trembling, clutched the scraps of cloth wrapped around her newborn daughters. She could feel their small bodies shivering against her. She could hear their weak, desperate cries. Her name was Ilara Quinn. She had stopped thinking of it as hers 2 days ago, when her husband screamed it at her like a curse before dragging her into the snow. Useless. Worthless. You gave me nothing but girls. Hi, my beautiful family. Thank you for sticking around with me through our trying times. I really appreciate your love and support. We're finally back again to give you many more beautiful stories. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. The words still rang in her skull, sharper than the cold. Damon had torn her daughters from her arms, studied them with disgust, then hurled them back into her chest. The impact had stolen her breath. The cruelty had stolen something deeper. Take your useless brood and get out. That had been hours ago, or perhaps a full day. Time had blurred into a fog of pain and cold. She had walked the frozen streets, stumbling over ice, her body still bleeding from childbirth. No one had opened their doors. No one had looked her way. Now she sat alone, waiting. She couldn't cry anymore. The tears had frozen on her cheeks long ago, leaving salt tracks that burned in the wind. Her lips were cracked, her vision blurred. The cold had seeped so deep into her bones that she no longer shivered. She looked down at the tiny faces barely visible beneath the cloth. Leora and Marin. She had named them in secret, whispered the names as Damon raged. He had never asked. "I'm sorry," she breathed, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." She had tried. She had wanted to be enough. But her body had betrayed her, or so Damon claimed. She had given him daughters when he demanded a son. She had failed the one test that mattered. And now her daughters would die because of it. Because of her. The wind howled. Frost crept up the iron bench, spreading like skeletal fingers. Ilara's eyelids grew heavy. The cold wasn't so bad anymore. "It feels almost warm now."
Soft.
She let her eyes close.
This is how it ends.
Then the wind changed. The air shifted, not colder, but different. Electric. Heavy. The snow stopped falling in her immediate circle, hovering midair as if held by invisible hands. Ilara's eyes opened. Hoofbeats echoed through the empty street, impossibly clear despite the storm. A carriage emerged from the white curtain of snow, black lacquered wood, silver filigree, wheels that glided soundlessly over ice. It stopped in front of her. The door opened, but no one stepped out. Instead, footsteps approached from the side.
Slow.
Measured. Purposeful. Ilara's breath caught. A figure materialized through the swirling snow, tall, cloaked in emerald and silver, with pale hair that seemed to glow against the darkness. His coat billowed like wings. His boots made no sound on the frozen ground. Then she saw his eyes.
Red.
Glowing softly in the storm. Not human. Not mortal. She should have been terrified. She should have screamed, pulled her daughters closer, begged for mercy. But something about the way he moved, careful, restrained, stilled her panic. He stopped a few feet away, studying her. His gaze moved from her bloodied dress to the bundles in her arms, then back to her face. His expression shifted, something she had not seen in years.
Concern.
For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The storm raged around them, but here, in this small circle, the world felt suspended. Then he moved. He knelt. A king, because she could feel it in the way the air bowed around him, knelt in the snow before her. His voice, when it came, was low and impossibly gentle. "You should not meet death tonight." Alara stared at him, her cracked lips parting but no sound emerging. He tilted his head slightly, his red eyes searching hers. Not with hunger, not with cruelty, with something that felt like recognition. "Come with me." 3 words. Quiet, steady, impossible. Alara's fingers tightened around her daughter's. Her voice came out as a rasp.
Why?
He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly reached up and unclasped his cloak, pulling it free from his shoulders. The fabric shimmered in the lamplight, rich, heavy, lined with silver thread. He leaned forward, careful not to touch her, and draped it over her trembling form. The warmth was instant, shocking, almost painful against her frozen skin. "Because," he said quietly, his red eyes never leaving hers, "you carry what I have been searching for." Her breath hitched. "I don't understand." He stood, offering no further explanation. Instead, he gestured toward the carriage, its door still open, warm golden light spilling out onto the snow. "You will," he said simply. "But first you must choose. Freeze here and let your daughters die beside you. Or trust a stranger who kneels before no one." Alara looked down at Leora and Marin. Their cries had quieted beneath the warmth of his cloak. Their tiny fingers curled against her chest. She had nothing left. No home. No husband. No hope. Only 2 daughters who deserved more than death in the snow. Slowly, painfully, she rose to her feet. Her legs nearly buckled, but she forced herself upright. She didn't take his hand, didn't let him touch her, but she took a step toward the carriage. Then another. The figure in emerald, the man with fire in his eyes, watched her in silence. When she reached the carriage door, he moved ahead, holding it open without a word. Inside, the carriage was impossibly warm. Velvet cushions, ghost blue lanterns, the scent of cedar and night-blooming flowers. Alara climbed inside, cradling her daughters close. She sank into the seat, her body finally releasing the tension it had held for hours. The door closed softly. The man, the vampire king, though she didn't yet know his name, settled across from her, keeping a respectful distance. The carriage began to move, gliding soundlessly through the storm. Alara stared at him, her heart pounding, her mind a storm of fear and confusion and something she couldn't name. "What's your name?" she whispered. He met her gaze. "Eric Valen." "And where are you taking me?" His lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, though his eyes remained serious. "Somewhere your husband will never find you. Somewhere your daughters will be safe." He paused, his red eyes glowing softly in the lantern light. "Somewhere you were always meant to be." Alara's grip on her daughters tightened. She didn't believe him, didn't trust him. But as the warmth seeped into her frozen limbs and the carriage carried her away from the frozen bench where she had been ready to die, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not hope. Not yet. But the smallest, most fragile possibility of it. The carriage glided through the storm with unnatural smoothness, as if the wheels never touched the ground. Alara sat rigid against the velvet cushions, her daughters pressed against her chest, her eyes fixed on the man across from her. Eric Valen, Vampire King. The words should have terrified her. Perhaps they would have, if she hadn't already lost everything. He hadn't moved since they began riding. He sat perfectly still, hands resting on his knees, his red eyes occasionally flickering to the twins before returning to the window. The restraint in his posture was deliberate, careful, as if he were consciously holding himself back. From what? Alara didn't want to know. The ghost blue lanterns swayed gently overhead, casting shifting shadows across the carved interior. The walls were inlaid with silver patterns that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them. Old magic. She could feel it humming in the wood, ancient and alive. Her dress was still wet with blood. The metallic scent filled the small space, thick and cloying. She watched Eric's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly and watched the way his fingers curled slightly against his knees. He was holding his breath. Fear spiked through her chest. He brought me here to feed on us. On my daughters. As if sensing her terror, Eric's eyes snapped to hers. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, slowly, he reached beneath his seat and withdrew a wooden box. Alara flinched back, pulling the twins closer. Peace, he said quietly, his voice like velvet over stone. I mean you no harm. He opened the box. Inside were neatly folded clothes, clean, soft, still warm as if they'd been sitting by a fire. Beside them sat a stoppered flask and a small bundle wrapped in wax paper. He set the box on the seat beside her, then retreated back to his corner. For the bleeding, he said, nodding toward the clothes. And there's water in the flask. Bread and cheese in the paper. Not much, but enough. Alara stared at the offerings, her mind struggling to reconcile them with her fears.
Why?
Because you need them.
No.
Her voice came out hoarse. Why did you take me? What do you want from us? Eric was silent for a long moment. The carriage turned, and through the window, Alara caught glimpses of the storm still raging outside, but it seemed distant now, as if they were traveling through a different weather altogether. I've been searching, he said finally, for a woman who would bear moon-marked twins. Alara's breath caught. Moon-marked. Beneath their swaddling, Eric continued, his gaze steady, your daughters carry symbols. Faint, crescent-shaped. Most would never notice them, but I would. I have waited centuries for them. Her arms tightened around Leora and Marin. You're taking them?
No.
The word was firm, absolute. I am protecting them. And you. From what? From those who would use them. From the husband who cast you out. From a world that does not understand what they are. He paused. From death in the snow. Alara's throat constricted. She wanted to argue, to demand answers, but exhaustion pulled at her like chains. Her body was failing. She could feel it. Slowly, carefully, she reached for the clothes. Eric immediately turned his face toward the window, giving her privacy. She pressed the warm fabric against the wounds still bleeding beneath her dress, biting back a gasp of pain. When she was done, she took the flask with trembling hands and drank. The water was cool and clean, the first thing she'd had in days. It hurt going down, but she forced herself to drink more. Your name, Eric said quietly, still facing the window. You never told me. She hesitated, the old shame rising in her throat. Her name had been a weapon in Damon's mouth. A curse. A mark of failure. Alara, she whispered finally. Alara Quinn. Eric turned back to her, and something in his expression softened. Alara, he repeated, as if testing the shape of it. It suits you. No one had said her name like that with something close to respect in years. Before she could respond, the carriage shuddered slightly. The air pressure changed, making her ears pop. The storm outside suddenly stopped, the howling wind cutting off mid-scream. Alara leaned toward the window. Her breath stopped. The world had changed. They were no longer in Thorn's car. No longer in any place she recognized. Before them stretched a landscape that shouldn't exist, a realm of impossible beauty and darkness intertwined. Towers rose in the distance, their spires made of crystal that caught moonlight and shattered it into rainbow fractals. Bridges arced between floating islands, their spans forged from silver that glowed with inner light. Rivers wound through valleys far below, their waters gleaming like liquid mercury beneath a sky crowded with 3 moons. The Midnight Dominion. "We crossed the veil," Eric said quietly. "The barrier between your world and mine." Alara couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She pressed her hand against the window, her reflection ghostly against the alien landscape beyond. Where? She swallowed hard. Where are we? "My kingdom," Eric said. "The last stronghold of the highborn vampiric line. A place your husband will never reach." The carriage descended along a winding road carved into a mountainside. Below, Alara could see a city spread out like a dark jewel, buildings with obsidian walls and silver roofs, streets lit by floating orbs of cold fire, gardens where pale flowers bloomed beneath starlight. At the city's heart rose a fortress that dwarfed everything around it. The Moon Spire, she would later learn. Eric's citadel. Her new prison or sanctuary. She didn't yet know which. "You're afraid," Eric observed. Alara turned from the window to find him watching her with those impossibly red eyes. "Yes," she admitted. There was no point in lying. "Good," he said. "Fear will keep you cautious. But know this, Alara Quinn." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to something almost reverent. "In my kingdom, you are not what your husband named you. You are not worthless. Not broken. Not a failure." He glanced down at the sleeping twins in her arms. "You are the mother of the Moonmarked, the bearer of prophecy. And under my protection, you are untouchable." The carriage pulled through massive gates that swung open at their approach. Guards in silver armor lined the courtyard beyond, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. They had arrived. Alara held her daughters closer as the carriage came to a stop. Through the window, she could see faces turning toward them. Pale, beautiful, inhuman faces filled with shock and something that looked like recognition. "What happens now?" she whispered. Eric stood, ducking slightly beneath the carriage roof. He opened the door and cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine and something else, magic, ancient and potent. He turned back to her, offering his hand. "Now," he said quietly, "you begin again." Alara didn't take Eric's hand. She couldn't. Her arms were locked around her daughters, her body still trembling from cold and blood loss and the impossible reality of where she now stood. Instead, she gathered what remained of her strength and climbed down from the carriage on her own, her bare feet touching stone that thrummed with ancient power. The courtyard fell silent. Every eye turned toward her. Guards in silver armor. Servants in midnight blue. Pale faces with glowing eyes, some red like Eric's, others amber or silver. All of them frozen in shock. Immortal. Here. In the heart of the Midnight Dominion. Alara heard the whispers start, soft and sibilant, words in a language she didn't know. She pulled the emerald cloak tighter around herself and her daughters, feeling exposed despite the fabric. Eric stepped beside her, his presence immediately commanding. The whispers stopped. "This woman and her children are under my protection," he announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard with regal authority. "Any who threaten them threaten me. Any who harm them will answer to me personally." The weight of his words settled over the assembled crowd like a blade. Heads bowed, fists pressed to chests in salute. But Alara saw the doubt in their faces, the confusion, the barely concealed hostility. "Come," Eric said quietly, gesturing toward the fortress entrance. The moon spire towered above them, its walls carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Silver veins ran through the structure like frozen lightning, pulsing faintly with each heartbeat. Massive doors stood open, revealing a cavernous entrance hall lit by floating orbs of cold fire. Alara's legs nearly gave out on the first step. Eric moved as if to catch her, then stopped himself, maintaining that careful distance. Instead, he gestured and two female servants appeared, young-looking, with kind faces despite their inhuman features. "Take her to the eastern chambers," Eric commanded. "Summon Myrina immediately. And send for hot water, clean clothes, and food." "Yes, my lord," they murmured in unison. One of them, dark-haired with silver eyes, approached Alara hesitantly. "May I help you, mistress?" "Mistress. Not a prisoner. Not an intruder." Alara nodded weakly, allowing the woman to support her weight as they moved through the entrance hall. She caught glimpses of impossible architecture, staircases that spiraled upward into darkness, halls that seemed to extend farther than the walls should allow, tapestries depicting battles between creatures of nightmare and legend. They climbed a wide staircase, then another, finally reaching a corridor lined with arched windows. Through them, Alara could see the city below, its lights twinkling like captured stars. The eastern chambers were larger than Damon's entire bedroom had been. A four-poster bed dominated the space, its dark wood carved with lunar phases. Velvet curtains. A fireplace already burning with blue-white flames that gave off heat but no smoke. Doors leading to other rooms, a bathing chamber, the servant explained, and a nursery. A nursery. Alara's throat tightened. She had never been given a nursery for her daughters. Damon had forbidden it. "Please sit," the servant urged, guiding her to a cushioned chair near the fire. "Myrina will be here soon. She's our finest healer." Alara sank into the chair, exhausting and finally overwhelming her. Leora and Marin stirred against her chest, making small sounds of distress. She rocked them gently, whispering reassurances she didn't believe. The door opened. An older woman entered. Or at least, she had the bearing of age, though her face was unlined and luminous. She wore robes of deep purple, and her eyes were the color of moonlight. "I am Myrina," she said, her voice surprisingly warm. "May I see them?" Alara's instinct was to refuse, to hold her daughters tighter. But something in the healer's expression, genuine concern rather than curiosity, made her relent. Carefully, Myrina unwrapped the scraps of cloth around the first infant. "Leora." She examined the child with gentle, practiced hands, checking her breathing, her color, the strength of her limbs. Then she paused. "By the ancient moons," Myrina breathed. On Leora's left shoulder blade, barely visible against her pale skin, was a mark, a crescent moon, delicate as if painted with silver ink. Myrina quickly checked Marin. There, on the back of her right hand, was an identical symbol. The healer looked up at Alara with something close to awe. "Do you know what this means?" Eric mentioned. Alara's voice failed. "A prophecy." Myrina nodded slowly. The Lunar Bearer. A mortal woman who would birth moon-marked twins during the reign of the last highborn king. Children who would bridge the mortal and immortal worlds. Children who would either save us all or destroy us. Destroy. Alara's arms tightened around her daughters. They're infants. They're innocent. All prophecies are double-edged, child. Myrina began rewrapping the babies with clean, soft cloth. "But know this, you have given birth to something extraordinary. These marks are not simply symbols. They are conduits for power older than this realm itself." Before Alara could respond, a deep bell tolled somewhere in the fortress. 3 resonant notes that seemed to vibrate in her bones. Myrina's expression tightened. The Night Council has been summoned. An hour later, Alara stood in a circular chamber at the heart of the moon spire, feeling every bit the intruder she was. Myrina had cleaned her wounds, given her a simple but elegant dress of midnight blue, and woven her tangled hair into a loose braid. The twins slept in a bassinet beside her, watched over by the silver-eyed servant. Around her, the Night Council assembled. 12 figures, each radiating power that made the air shimmer. Some looked young, others ancient. All of them watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to open contempt. Eric stood at the chamber's center, directly beneath a circular window that framed the largest moon above. He had changed into formal robes, emerald and silver, a crown of dark metal resting on his pale hair. He looked every inch a king. "This is unprecedented," a male voice cut through the murmuring. The speaker was tall, with angular features and eyes like chips of amber. "Immortal? Here? You risk everything we've built, Eric." "I risk nothing, Counselor Theron," Eric replied coolly. "I will fulfill prophecy." "Prophecy?" A woman with ice-white hair laughed bitterly. "Myths tell us to comfort ourselves. This changes nothing. It changes everything." Eric gestured toward the bassinet. "Look at them. The moon marks are genuine. This is the lunar bearer." Alara felt their gazes turn to her like physical weight. She wanted to shrink away, to run. Instead, she forced herself to stand straight, to meet their eyes even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "She's weak," Theron observed dismissively. "Half dead. What use is a bearer who cannot even stand without trembling?" "She survived abandonment, childbirth, and near death by exposure," Eric said, his voice sharp as a blade. "She walked through a winter storm with newborns and lived. Do not mistake trauma for weakness, Counselor." A sound interrupted the debate, a thin, wavering cry. Marin had awakened, her small face scrunching in distress. Alara immediately moved to the bassinet, lifting her daughter. The moment the infant's cry filled the chamber, the temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the floor in intricate, spiraling patterns radiating from where Alara stood. The candles flickered. Ice crystals formed on the stone walls, beautiful and terrible. The council stepped back in shock. "Impossible," Myrina whispered. Alara rocked Marin gently, and the crying softened. The frost stopped spreading but didn't melt. Leora woke then, and when she opened her eyes fully for the first time, they reflected the moonlight streaming through the window above, silver and luminous. Eric moved closer, studying the frost patterns on the floor. They weren't random. They formed shapes, constellations, words in an ancient script, prophecies written in ice. When he looked up at Alara, his expression had changed. The careful distance was still there, but beneath it, she saw something else. Recognition, understanding, and something that looked almost like fear. "They're reacting to the Dominion's magic," he said quietly, "drawing power from the realm itself. As newborns." He turned to the council. "The prophecy is real. The question is whether we will be wise enough to embrace it or foolish enough to deny it." The chamber fell silent. Finally, Theron bowed his head, reluctantly, but genuinely. "Then let it be so," he said. "The lunar bearer is recognized." But as the council dispersed and servants escorted Alara back to her chambers, she caught Eric watching her from across the room. His red eyes glowed in the darkness, troubled and intense. For the first time in centuries, the Vampire King felt something he thought he'd buried with his dead mate. Hope. And it terrified him. For the first time in 3 days, Alara slept in a bed. The mattress was soft, the blankets warm, the room protected by stone walls and ancient magic. Her daughters lay in their bassinet nearby, breathing peacefully. She should have felt safe. Instead, she dreamed. Damon's face looming over her, twisted with rage. His hand raised, the crack of impact against her cheek. Her body hitting the floor. "You're worthless. Broken. Can't even give me a son." Blood on the bathroom tile. Pain tearing through her abdomen. Her hands reached for someone who was already gone. "I should have thrown you out months ago." The door slammed, the lock clicking. His footsteps walked away while she bled alone. Cold. Snow. His hands ripping her daughters from her arms. Alara woke up screaming. She bolted upright, gasping for air, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might burst. Her hands flew to her chest, checking for wounds that were no longer there. Sweat soaked her nightgown despite the cool air. The twins stirred but didn't wake. Their small chests rose and fell peacefully. Alara pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to slow her breathing, trying to remind herself where she was. Not Thorne's car. Not Damon's manor. Safe. You're safe. But the panic wouldn't release its grip. A soft knock sounded at the door. Alara froze, terror spiking through her. He found me. He's here. Alara. Eric's voice, low and careful. May I enter? Not Damon.
Eric.
She tried to speak, but couldn't form words. The door opened slowly. He hadn't waited for permission, but he moved with deliberate caution, staying in the doorway, his hands visible and empty. He wore simpler clothes now, the formal robes discarded. Just dark trousers and a loose shirt, his pale hair falling across his shoulders. Without the crown and regalia, he looked less like a king and more like what he truly was, something ancient and weary. I heard you, he said quietly. The whole fortress heard you. Shame burned through her chest. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Don't. The word was firm but not harsh. Don't apologize for fear. Don't apologize for pain. He remained in the doorway, maintaining that careful distance. She noticed he didn't breathe, or if he did, it was so subtle she couldn't detect it. Reducing her scent, she realized. Protecting her even now. Do you want me to leave? He asked. Alara looked at him, really looked at him. At the tension in his shoulders, the concern in his red eyes, the restraint it must cost him to stand so still. No, she whispered.
Stay.
Please. Eric moved into the room, but stopped several feet from the bed. He settled into the chair near the fireplace, his posture relaxed but alert. Tell me about him. Who? The man who did this to you. Alara's hands twisted in the blankets. She'd never told anyone. Damon had made sure she had no one to tell. But something about the darkness, the quiet, the presence of someone who asked without demanding made the words rise like poison finally being drawn from a wound. His name was Damon Rusk, she began, her voice hollow. We were married for 3 years. He chose me because I was young and quiet and had no family to interfere with. He wanted an heir. That was all. Eric listened without interrupting. When I didn't conceive immediately, he blamed me, called me barren, broken. The words tasted like ash. When I finally became pregnant, he was pleased. Until we learned it was twins. Until we learned they were girls. Her voice cracked. He said I'd failed him, that I was useless, that I couldn't even perform the one function a wife was meant for. When I went into labor, he left. Didn't call for a midwife. Didn't stay. I delivered them alone on our bedroom floor. She heard Eric's sharp intake of breath, the first time she'd heard him react so viscerally. When he finally came back and saw them, Alara closed her eyes. He looked at them like they were garbage. Like I was garbage. He dragged me outside, threw them at me, and told me to take my useless brood and die in the streets where I belonged. The silence that followed was profound. When Alara finally opened her eyes, she found Eric leaning forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly together. His expression was carefully controlled, but she saw the rage burning beneath it. Ancient, terrible rage. If he comes for you, Eric said softly, I will destroy him. Completely. There will be nothing left to bury. It should have frightened her. Instead, she felt something crack open in her chest, not fear, but the first stirring of something like vindication. Why do you care? She asked. You don't know me. Eric was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned back, his gaze distant. I had a mate once. Centuries ago. Her name was Seraphine. Alara's breath caught. He'd never mentioned this. She conceived after decades of trying. Twins, as it happened. His voice was carefully flat, but she heard the grief beneath it. She didn't survive the birth. Neither did they. I held her as she died, promising her I would see our children grow. But there were no children to raise. Only 3 bodies I buried beneath the oldest moon oak in the Dominion. His hands clenched. I buried my hope with them, convinced myself I would never know that particular pain again. And for 300 years, I didn't. He looked at her then, and Elara saw centuries of loss in those red eyes. Then I saw you in the snow, dying with newborns in your arms, and everything I'd buried came flooding back. Not the hope, the fury, the injustice of it. That you should suffer what Seraphine suffered. That your daughters should die before they've lived. So you saved us, Elara whispered. I saved myself, Eric corrected quietly. By saving you. The weight of his confession settled between them. Not romantic, not desperate, but honest. 2 people who had survived unbearable loss, recognizing each other across the gulf of their pain. A soft sound broke the moment. Marin stirred in the bassinet, making small whimpering noises. Before Elara could move, the moonlight streaming through the window brightened, focusing on the bassinet like a spotlight. The silver glow wrapped around Marin gently, and the infant quieted immediately, soothed by the light itself. Both Elara and Eric stared. She's manipulating moonlight, Eric murmured. At 3 days old. Then Leora woke, and the shadows in the corners of the room stretched toward her like curious fingers. Not threatening, playful almost. The darkness coiled around the bassinet's posts, forming shapes. Animals, flowers, dancing figures. And Leora commands shadow. Elara breathed. They're so small. How is this possible? They're not entirely mortal anymore, Eric said, standing slowly and approaching the bassinet with reverence. They're becoming something between worlds. The prophecy spoke of this. Children who would bridge the mortal and immortal realms. They're literally embodying that bridge. Elara joined him, looking down at her daughters. Fear and awe warred in her chest. Will they be safe? Will this power protect them? If you teach them to wield it. Eric glanced at her. And if you learn to wield your own. Mine. The aura you manifested when the council gathered. The frost that spread from your daughter's cries. His expression was serious. You're changing too, Elara. The prophecy didn't speak only of the twins. It spoke of their mother, the lunar bearer. You're becoming something more than you were. Elara looked down at her hands, turning them over in the moonlight. They looked the same, but she felt different. Stronger. Less breakable. I don't know how to be strong, she admitted. Strength isn't something you learn, Eric said quietly. It's something you survive into. You've already proven yours. You just haven't recognized it yet. He moved back toward the door, that careful distance reasserting itself. But before he left, he paused. You're not worthless, Elara Quinn. You're not broken. You never were. His red eyes met hers steadily. And anyone who made you believe otherwise deserves the death I will give them. He left before she could respond, the door closing softly behind him. Elara stood in the moonlight with her daughters, feeling the truth of his words settle into her bones. For the first time since Damon had thrown her into the snow, she believed she might survive this. More than survive. She might actually become who she was meant to be. Damon Rusk stared at the empty carriage stop where he'd last seen his wife collapse into the snow. For days had passed. The street cleaners had swept away the evidence, the blood, the scraps of cloth, the small indentations where a woman and 2 infants had lain dying. But there was nobody. She should be dead, he muttered, pacing the frozen cobblestones. She should have frozen before dawn. His steward, a nervous man named Garrett, shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps someone took her to the charity hospital, my lord? I checked every hospital, every morgue, every poorhouse in 3 districts. Damon's hand clenched into a fist.
She vanished.
Along with those brats.
He should have been relieved.
The problem had solved itself. Wife and unwanted daughters gone, leaving him free to remarry someone useful. But something gnawed at him, a persistent unease he couldn't name. "There's a woman," Garrett said hesitantly. "A seer. She operates from the Crimson Moon Tavern in the Eastern Quarter. They say she can track anyone, living or dead." Damon's lip curled. "Charlatans and con artists." "Perhaps. But you've exhausted conventional methods, my lord." The Crimson Moon reeked of cheap ale and desperation. Damon wrinkled his nose as he descended the stairs to the cellar where the seer allegedly worked. The walls were draped with moth-eaten velvet, candles casting dancing shadows across cluttered tables covered in bones, crystals, and arcane symbols drawn in chalk. The seer herself was younger than he expected, perhaps 30, with dark eyes that reflected candlelight like a cat's. She didn't look up when he entered. "Damon Rusk," she said flatly, wondering where his discarded wife has gone. "How did you? I'm a seer. It's what I do." She finally raised her gaze to his. "The question is, do you really want to know? Because the answer will cost you more than gold." Damon pulled a heavy purse from his coat and dropped it on the table. "Find her. Find them." The seer opened the purse, examined the contents, then swept it aside as if it were nothing. She gestured for him to sit. From a leather pouch, she withdrew a blackened mirror, its surface rippling like liquid. She held it over a candle flame, whispering words in a language that made Damon's skin prickle. The mirror's surface cleared, showing not a reflection but an image, Alara. But not the broken, bleeding woman he'd cast out. This Alara wore elegant clothes, stood in a fortress of black stone and silver, and held his daughters, no, the daughters, with confidence he'd never seen in her. "She lives," the seer said. "And she is far beyond your reach." "Where?" Damon demanded. The seer's expression darkened. "She has crossed into the Midnight Dominion, the realm of the vampires." Damon's blood went cold. "That's a myth. Children's stories." "Is it?" The seer tilted the mirror. The image shifted, showing the twins, but their eyes glowed faintly, and strange symbols marked their skin. "Your daughters carry moon marks, ancient signs of power. They are the bridge between mortal and immortal worlds. Prophesied children, worth more than all the gold in your miserable estate." Damon's mind raced.
Power.
Leverage. Access to a vampire realm meant access to their magic, their resources, their centuries of accumulated wealth and influence. "How do I get them back?" The seer smiled, and it wasn't kind. "You don't. Not alone. But there are those who would help you for a price. Rogue vampires, exiled from the Dominion, hungry to reclaim what they've lost. They would trade much for a way back inside." "Where do I find them?" She wrote an address on a scrap of parchment. "Go at midnight. Bring more gold. And be prepared to offer them something they want more than money." "What's that?" "Your mortal kingdom's borders. Unguarded access. Hunting rights." Damon should have hesitated. Should have considered the implications. But all he saw was opportunity, a chance to reclaim what he'd thrown away, not out of love, but out of ambition. "Done," he said. Alara's muscles burned as she held the defensive stance Eric had shown her. They stood in a private training courtyard beneath the largest moon, surrounded by walls that absorbed sound and ensured privacy. "Again," Eric instructed, his voice patient but firm. She'd been training for 6 days now. At first, she could barely stand for more than a few minutes. But something in her had awakened. The same power that had manifested as frost patterns, now focusing into something more controlled. "Feel the moonlight," Eric said, circling her slowly. "It's not just illumination. It's energy. Power. Draw it into yourself." Alara closed her eyes, reaching for the sensation she'd felt when protecting her daughters. The cold fire in her chest. The connection to something vast and ancient. Her hands began to glow with silver light. "Good," Eric murmured. Now release it. Not as an explosion, as an extension of your will. She pushed, and the light formed a barrier in the air before her, translucent, shimmering, solid enough to block Eric's testing strike. Excellent. Pride colored his voice. You're progressing faster than I expected. Alara lowered her hands, the light fading. She was breathing hard but felt stronger than she had in years. I have to. For them. She glanced toward the window of her chambers, where Myrina watched over the sleeping twins. Eric moved closer, not quite as distant as he'd been that first night, but still careful. You're doing this for yourself as well. You know that, yes? I don't know what I know anymore. Alara flexed her glowing fingers. A month ago, I was a wife who couldn't do anything right. Now I'm apparently prophesied to stand beside a vampire king. Prophecies are guidelines, not commands, Eric said quietly. You don't have to be anything you don't choose to be. She looked at him, really looked at him. Over the past week, she'd learned the small details, how he tilted his head when considering something, the way his expression softened when he spoke of Seraphine, the restraint it cost him to be near her blood scent, but never once make her feel threatened. Why are you so kind to me? She asked suddenly. Eric was silent for a long moment. Because kindness was denied to both of us when we needed it most. And because... He stopped himself. Because? Alara prompted. Because you remind me that hope can exist even after it's been buried for centuries. The weight of his words hung between them. Alara felt something stir in her chest. Not love. Not yet. But the fragile beginning of trust. Before she could respond, a sharp bell rang out across the Dominion. 3 urgent peals that sent ice through her veins. Eric's head snapped up, his expression transforming from gentle to deadly in an instant. The alarm ward. What does it mean? It means someone has breached the veil's outer boundary. He was already moving, his hand going to the blade at his hip. Someone is trying to force their way into the Dominion. Alara's blood went cold. Damon. Eric turned to her, his red eyes burning. Can you fight? Every instinct screamed at her to say no, to hide, to let someone else handle the danger. But she thought of her daughters sleeping upstairs, of everything she'd learned, of who she was becoming. Yes, she said, and meant it. Then come. We end this threat before it reaches your daughters. They ran through the fortress halls as guards mobilized around them. Through the windows, Alara could see the sky darkening unnaturally, storm clouds gathering where moments before there had been stars. At the throne room, Counselor Theron was already waiting, his face grim. The veil is tearing along the eastern boundary, he reported. Rogue vampires are using mortal magic to force entry. And they're not alone. There are mortals with them. Soldiers. Led by someone who keeps demanding his property be returned. Alara's hands clenched. He's here. He's actually here. Eric's expression was stone. Then we show him exactly what happens to those who threaten what is mine to protect. He turned to the assembled guards, his voice ringing with absolute authority. To the boundary. No one crosses into my realm uninvited. No one. As they mobilized, Alara felt her lunar aura flare to life, responding to the threat to her children. Damon was coming. But this time, she would not be the woman he threw away. This time, she would be the one who stood her ground. The eastern boundary of the Midnight Dominion shimmered like broken glass, the veil torn and bleeding ethereal light into the darkness. Alara stood with Eric's forces on a ridge overlooking the breach, her heart hammering as she watched figures pour through the rupture. Rogue vampires. She could tell by the way they moved. Too fast, too fluid, their eyes glowing with hunger rather than the controlled luminescence of Eric's court. Behind them came mortal soldiers in mismatched armor, carrying torches that burned with unnatural green flame. They've corrupted the fire with blood magic, Eric said grimly, his hand on his sword. They mean to burn their way through the Dominion's defenses. How many? Theron asked. 30 rogues. Perhaps 50 mortals. Eric's jaw tightened. More than a raid. This is an invasion. Alara scanned the attacking force, searching for one face. And there, emerging from the veil's tear like a ghost from her nightmares, was Damon Rusk. He looked smaller than she remembered, less imposing. But the cruelty in his expression was unchanged, and when his gaze swept across the ridge and found her standing among the Dominion's defenders, his face twisted with rage. Alara. His voice carried across the battlefield, magically amplified. You dare stand against me? Return what's mine. Her body went rigid. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to make herself small and invisible the way she'd learned to survive 3 years of his rage. Eric's hand touched her shoulder, gentle, grounding. You don't have to face him. Go back to the fortress. Protect your daughters from within. Alara's hands clenched.
No.
I'm done running from him. Before Eric could respond, a sharp whistle cut through the air. 3 figures detached from the main force, rogues moving with terrifying speed, bypassing the battle line entirely, heading straight for the fortress. Assassins, Theron snarled. They're going for the twins. Alara's blood turned to ice. No. She was running before thought caught up to action, her body moving with strength she hadn't possessed a week ago. Behind her, she heard Eric shouting commands, heard the clash of battle beginning, but all that mattered was reaching her daughters before the assassins did. The fortress loomed ahead. She burst through the entrance, taking stairs 3 at a time, her lungs burning. The eastern wing. The nursery, where Myrina stood guard. She rounded the final corner and stopped. 3 rogues stood in the hallway. Myrina lay crumpled against the wall, blood seeping from a wound at her temple, but still breathing. The nursery door hung open behind them. Inside, Alara could hear her daughters crying. Stand aside, mortal, one of the rogues hissed. We don't want you, just the marked ones. Something ignited in Alara's chest, not fear, not panic, but rage. Pure, molten, protective rage.
No.
She stepped forward, placing herself between the assassins and the nursery door. Her hands began to glow with silver light. The rogues laughed. You think that parlor trick frightens us? We've killed moon witches stronger than you. Then you've never met a mother protecting her children. The first rogue lunged. Alara raised her hands instinctively, and light exploded from her palms. Not a gentle barrier, but a blast of lunar fire that struck the attacker mid-leap. He flew backward, slamming into the stone wall hard enough to crack it, and didn't rise. The other 2 hesitated. Alara advanced, her aura blazing brighter. She could feel it now, the connection to the moons above, to the ancient magic woven through the Dominion, to the fierce love that burned in her chest for her daughters. It flowed through her like liquid silver, demanding release. Leave, she said, her voice resonating with power she didn't recognize. Leave, or I will end you. The rogues exchanged glances. Then they attacked together. Alara screamed, and her aura detonated outward in a dome of protective light. The assassins were thrown back like leaves in a hurricane, their bodies crashing through windows, tumbling down staircases. The walls around her frosted over, ice spreading in intricate patterns that spelled out ancient words of protection. Then the power cut off like a snapped thread, and Alara collapsed to her knees, gasping. Footsteps thundered up the stairs. Eric appeared, sword drawn and bloodied, his expression fierce, until he saw her kneeling in the hallway, surrounded by frost patterns and unconscious rogues. Alara. The twins, she gasped. Are they? She forced herself up and stumbled into the nursery. Leora and Marin lay in their bassinet, crying but unharmed, wrapped in a cocoon of shadows and moonlight that must have formed when Alara's power manifested. Relief hit her so hard she nearly fell again. You did this? Eric asked quietly, surveying the devastation in the hallway. I didn't know I could. Her hands were still trembling. I just knew I wouldn't let them take my daughters. Eric's expression shifted into something between awe and concern. The prophecies spoke of the lunar bearer having protective magic. But this. He gestured to the frozen walls, the shattered stone. This is beyond anything recorded. You're not just protecting them, Elara. You're channeling power that shouldn't be accessible to mortals. I don't care what I'm channeling. She lifted Leora, cradling her daughter close. I care that they're safe. A roar of fury echoed from outside, Damon's voice, twisted with rage. Eric moved to the window. Below, the battle had shifted. The rogue vampires were being driven back by the Dominion's forces, but Damon stood at the veil's tear, surrounded by corrupted flame, screaming, "Bring me my wife. Bring me those children. They are my property." Elara joined Eric at the window, Leora in her arms. Looking down at Damon, she felt something inside her finally, irrevocably break free from the chains he'd wrapped around her self-worth. "I was never your property," she whispered. Damon's gaze snapped upward, finding her in the window. His face contorted. "You belong to me, Elara. You and those brats are mine by law."
No.
Her voice was quiet, but carried on the wind with unnatural clarity. "I belong to myself, and these children belong to the future you tried to destroy." Her aura flared again, visible even from this distance, a column of silver light that rose from the fortress like a beacon. Damon actually stepped back, fear flickering across his features. "This isn't over," he snarled. "I will return with more forces. I will tear down your fortress stone by stone. You cannot hide from me." "She doesn't need to hide from you," Eric said, his voice carrying the weight of ancient authority. "She has me." He raised his hand, and the veil's tear began to seal, closing with the sound of tearing fabric and breaking glass. Damon screamed in fury as the barrier reformed, cutting off his access, trapping him on the mortal side. The battlefield fell silent. The remaining rogues either lay dead or had fled. Victory, but at a cost. Elara swayed on her feet, exhaustion finally overwhelming her. The aura flickered and died. Her vision blurred. "Elara." Eric caught her before she hit the floor, careful of the infant still clutched in her arms. He lifted both of them with ease, his expression fierce with something that looked like pride and terror combined. "Get Myrina," he commanded the guards rushing into the room, "and summon every healer in the fortress.
Now."
As he carried Elara back to her chambers, she drifted in and out of consciousness, catching fragments. Eric's voice, low and urgent. "Stay with me. You did it. They're safe. You kept them safe." Myrina's hands examining her, gentle and efficient. She's channeling more power than her body can sustain.
She needs rest.
Days of it. And finally, as darkness pulled her under completely, Eric's whisper against her hair. "You magnificent, impossible woman. What are you becoming?" Elara didn't have an answer, but as sleep claimed her, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was no longer the woman Damon Rusk had thrown away. She was something new, something powerful, something he should fear. Elara woke to the firelight and the scent of night-blooming jasmine. For a disoriented moment, she didn't recognize the room, darker than her chambers, with tapestries depicting ancient battles and a massive four-poster bed carved with vampiric runes. Eric's chambers. He sat in a chair beside the bed, still as a statue, watching her with those red eyes that no longer frightened her. His expression softened when she stirred. "How long?" she asked, her voice hoarse. 2 days. "Myrina said you exhausted yourself completely." He leaned forward slightly. "Your daughters are safe. Myrina watches them constantly." Elara pushed herself upright despite her body's protests. "Damon is trapped on the mortal side. The veil is sealed and reinforced. Eric's jaw tightened. But he won't stop. He's gathering more forces. More magic. The next attack will be worse. Something inside Alara crystallized into absolute resolve. Then I won't run. I won't hide. I will face him. Alara.
No.
She met his gaze steadily. I spent 3 years cowering from him. 3 years making myself small, hoping that would keep me safe. It never did. The only thing that's ever protected me is standing my ground. She looked at her hands, remembering the silver light. And now I have the power to do it. Eric studied her for a long moment. Then he rose, moving to the window where 3 moons hung in the sky like watchful eyes. The prophecy doesn't just protect you, Alara. You are the prophecy. The lunar bearer isn't merely the mother of moon-marked twins. She's the catalyst, the one who will tip the balance between mortal and immortal realms. He turned back to her. You're not standing beside destiny. You're wielding it. The weight of his words should have crushed her. Instead, she felt them settle into her bones like truth she'd always known but never spoken. Then teach me, she said. Teach me to wield it properly. The training began at dawn and didn't end until the moons rose. Day after day, Alara pushed her body past exhaustion, learning to channel her lunar aura with precision rather than desperation. She learned to form shields, to send focused blasts of light, to sense threats before they materialized. The twins' abilities grew alongside hers. When Alara was calm, Leora's shadows danced playfully. When Alara was focused, Marin's moonlight intensified, illuminating entire rooms. They were connected, mother and daughters, linked by prophecy and blood, and something deeper than either. Eric was there for every session, patient and demanding in equal measure. But Alara noticed the way his restraint began to slip, the way his gaze lingered, the careful distance shrinking incrementally. The way he spoke her name, soft and reverent, as if it were something precious. And she noticed her own response. The way her heart quickened when he entered a room. The trust that had formed between them, built on shared loss and quiet understanding. He wasn't her savior anymore. He was simply Eric, a man who had seen her at her lowest and chosen to believe in her strength anyway. One evening, after a particularly intense training session, they stood together on a balcony overlooking the Dominion. Eric's shoulder was inches from hers, that careful distance finally, tentatively closing. He's coming soon, Eric said quietly. I can feel it. The blood moon rises in 3 days. He'll attack then, when the barrier between worlds is thinnest. Alara looked up at the sky, where one moon was already beginning to redden at its edges. Let him come, she said, her voice steady. I'm ready. Eric turned to her, and in his eyes she saw everything he hadn't yet said, the longing, the fear, the hope he'd thought buried forever. You're extraordinary, Alara Quinn, he whispered. And when this is over, when Damon is defeated and your daughters are safe, I hope you'll consider staying. Not because of prophecy, but because... He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish. Alara reached out and took his hand, the first time she'd touched him willingly. His skin was cool but not cold, solid and real beneath her fingers. Ask me again when the blood moon has set, she said softly. And I'll give you my answer. In the distance, the horizon darkened. Storm clouds gathered where the veil grew thin. Damon was coming, but this time, Alara would be ready. The blood moon rose like a wound in the sky, painting the midnight dominion in shades of crimson and shadow. On the eastern boundary, the veil tore open with a sound like the world breaking, and Damon's army poured through. Hundreds this time. Rogue vampires with eyes like coals. Mercenaries wearing armor inscribed with blood sigils. Corrupted mages hurling green fire that ate through stone and shadow alike. And at their center, Damon Rusk, mounted on a black horse, his face twisted with righteous fury. Alara stood at the front of the Dominion's forces, Eric at her side, her daughters safe in the fortress behind walls now reinforced with her own protective magic. She wore armor crafted specifically for her, lightweight silver inscribed with lunar runes, designed to channel rather than restrict her power. She no longer looked like the broken woman who'd collapsed in the snow. She stood tall, her aura already beginning to glow, her expression fierce and unafraid. There she is. Damon's voice boomed across the battlefield. My wayward wife, Alara. The armies clashed below them, but Damon rode straight for the ridge where she stood, his guards clearing a path through the chaos. He stopped 50 feet away, his horse rearing dramatically. Have you lost your mind? He shouted. Consorting with monsters? Poisoning our daughters with their corruption? I've come to save you from yourself. Alara stepped forward, leaving Eric's side. Every eye on the battlefield turned toward her. Save me? Her voice rang out clearly, amplified by the magic thrumming through her veins. You threw me into the snow to die, Damon. You called me worthless. You ripped our daughters from my arms and told me to take my useless brood and disappear. I was angry. Damon snarled. You failed me, but I'm willing to forgive you. Return to your rightful place. Bring me those children. They belong to the Rusk line. They belong to no one but themselves. Alara's hands began to glow. And I was never yours to own. Damon's face purpled with rage. You are my wife. My property by law. No. The word was quiet but absolute. I was nothing because of you. Now I am what you could never break. Her aura exploded outward, not wild like before, but controlled, purposeful, magnificent. Silver light erupted from her body, forming a dome that stretched across the entire battlefield. Above, the blood moon seemed to respond, its light intensifying, pouring power into her. And from the fortress behind her came an answering surge, her daughters, even at their tender age, instinctively amplifying their mother's power. Moonlight and shadow intertwined with Alara's aura, creating something never seen before, a shield woven from prophecy itself. Damon's forces slammed against it and were thrown back, their corrupted magic shattering like glass. Rogues screamed as the pure lunar energy burned away their stolen power. Mercenaries fell to their knees, unable to advance.
Now.
Eric's voice cut through the chaos. He moved like death given form, his ancient power finally unleashed. His sword blazed with crimson fire as he tore through the rogue vampires, each strike severing not just flesh, but their very connection to the immortal realm. This was no mere king. This was the last of the highborn, and his fury was terrible to behold. Alara and Eric fought as one entity, her light and his darkness, protection and destruction, two halves of a whole neither had known they needed. Where she shielded, he struck. Where he faltered, she reinforced. The prophecy wasn't just being fulfilled, it was being rewritten by their combined will. Damon watched his army crumble, his confidence fracturing. He spurred his horse forward, drawing a sword, charging directly at Alara with murderous intent. If I can't have you, no one will. Alara didn't flinch. She raised her hand, and a focused beam of lunar fire struck Damon's sword, melting it to slag. The force threw him from his horse, and he landed hard in the mud, gasping. She walked toward him slowly, deliberately, her aura blazing like a second sun. Above, the blood moon reached its apex. Damon scrambled backward, fear finally replacing his rage. Alara, please, I'm your husband. You are my tormentor. She stood over him, power crackling around her fingertips. But I will not kill you. That would make me like you. She pressed her glowing hand to his chest, and he screamed as her magic poured into him, not destroying, but severing. Every dark pact he'd made, every corrupted spell, every stolen power burned away, leaving him diminished. Mortal, powerless. Go back to your empty manor, Alara said coldly. Live with what you've lost. And if you ever come near my daughters again, I will not be merciful a second time. Eric appeared beside her, his sword at Damon's throat. The veil is closed to you permanently.
Return to the mortal realm.
You are exiled from the Dominion for eternity. With a gesture, Eric opened a portal, not to the battlefield, but directly to Thornscar's streets. Guards seized Damon and threw him through. He landed in the snow where he'd once thrown Alara, and the portal sealed behind him with finality. The battlefield fell silent. Damon's remaining forces, seeing their leader defeated and stripped of power, fled through the dying veil. The Dominion's forces raised their weapons in victory. Alara's aura finally dimmed, exhaustion threatening to claim her. But this time, when she swayed, Eric caught her gently. You did it, he murmured against her hair. You saved us all. We did it, she corrected, leaning into his strength. Above them, the blood moon began to fade, returning to silver as dawn approached. The battle was over, and Alara Quinn had finally, irrevocably, become free. The fortress was quiet in the aftermath of battle. Healers moved through the halls tending to the wounded. Guards repaired damaged walls. The Dominion breathed slowly, recovering from the violence that had nearly torn it apart. Alara sat in the nursery, watching her daughters sleep. Leora and Marin lay peacefully in their bassinet, their small chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. The lunar marks on their skin glowed faintly in the moonlight streaming through the window, no longer something to hide, but something beautiful, something powerful. They were safe. Truly, finally safe. And so was she. The realization settled over her like a warm cloak. For the first time since she'd married Damon Rusk, she wasn't afraid. Wasn't looking over her shoulder. Wasn't waiting for the next blow, the next insult, the next reminder of her worthlessness. She was free. They're beautiful when they sleep, a voice said softly from the doorway. Alara turned to find Eric leaning against the frame, still in his battle-worn armor, exhaustion lining his features, but something gentle in his expression. He looked less like a king and more like a man who'd found something he thought he'd lost forever. They're beautiful always, Alara corrected with a small smile. But yes, sleep helps. Eric moved into the room, his footsteps silent on the stone floor. He stopped beside her, gazing down at the twins with an expression of wonder. I never thought I'd see children in these halls again, he said quietly. After Seraphine, I closed off that part of myself, told myself it was better to rule alone than to risk that kind of loss again. And now? Alara asked. He turned to her, and the weight of centuries seemed to lift from his shoulders. Now I think perhaps I was wrong. He offered his hand. Walk with me? Alara glanced at the twins. Myrina had just entered to take the night watch, bowing respectfully. With a nod to the healer, Alara took Eric's hand and let him lead her from the nursery. They walked in comfortable silence through the fortress, climbing stairs until they reached the highest tower. The door opened onto a balcony that overlooked the entire Dominion, the crystal spires, the silver bridges, the rivers of light winding through valleys of shadow. Above them, the three moons had returned to their natural silver, bathing everything in gentle luminescence. I brought you here to ask you something, Eric said, turning to face her fully. Not as a king to a subject, not as a prophecy demanding fulfillment, but as a man to a woman he has come to. He paused, searching for words. Admire, respect, care for it deeply. Alara's heart quickened. You've fulfilled the prophecy, Eric continued. You've saved the Dominion. Your daughters are safe. You could leave now if you wished. I would open the veil for you, give you wealth, land, protection in the mortal realm. You've earned your freedom. But, Alara prompted, sensing there was more. Eric took both her hands in his touch cool and steady. But I'm asking you to stay. Not as the lunar bearer. Not as a vessel for ancient magic. As Alara Quinn. The woman who fought when others would have broken. The mother who protected her daughters against impossible odds. The person who reminded me that hope can exist even in darkness. His red eyes held hers with devastating honesty. Walk beside me. Share this realm with me. Let me stand beside you as you raise your daughters. Not because prophecy demands it, but because I choose you. And I hope you might choose me. Alara felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from something she'd never felt before. Being chosen. Being seen. Being valued for exactly who she was. I spent 3 years being told I was worthless, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Being told my only value was in what I could provide. You've never asked me to be anything but myself. Because you are extraordinary, Eric said simply. Then yes. Alara squeezed his hands. Yes, I'll walk beside you. I'll stay. Not because I need rescuing, but because I want to. Because you've shown me what partnership truly means. Eric's expression transformed, centuries of loneliness finally breaking apart, replaced by something that looked like joy. He lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles with a reverence that made her breath catch. Then let me do this properly, he said. 3 nights later, under the full silver moon, the night court assembled in the grand hall. Every noble, every counselor, every citizen of rank stood witness as Alara Quinn walked down the center aisle, her daughters carried in a ceremonial bassinet by Myrina. She wore robes of midnight blue and silver, the colors of the Dominion, but the crown on her head was her own, forged from moonlight itself, gifted by Leora and Marin's combined magic. Eric stood waiting at the dais, resplendent in his formal regalia, his expression proud and tender. The rite was ancient, spoken in a language older than the Dominion itself. But its meaning was clear: acceptance, recognition, welcome. When it was complete, Eric turned to the assembled court. The Lunar Bearer stands before you, not as a title, but as a woman who has earned her place through courage, sacrifice, and love. Alara Quinn is under my protection. She is my partner. And any who threaten her or her daughters threaten the crown itself. One by one, the nobles bowed. Not to prophecy, not to destiny, but to the woman who had fulfilled it by being exactly who she needed to be. Counselor Theron, who had once opposed her, bowed deepest of all. Long may you stand beside our king, Lunar Bearer. Alara looked out at the assembled court, at Eric beside her, at her daughters sleeping peacefully despite the ceremony. She thought of the woman she'd been, broken, abandoned, left to die in the snow. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone strong, someone chosen, someone free. As the court celebrated, Eric leaned close and whispered, "What are you thinking?" Alara smiled, holding her daughters close as moonlight streamed through the windows, illuminating everything they'd built from ashes and snow and impossible hope. "I'm thinking," she said softly, "that I'm finally home." And in the Midnight Dominion, under 3 silver moons, a family born of prophecy and forged in fire began their future together. The end.